Alright, well week 2 of Eagles OTAs is here, but James Bradberry still isn't. So what does that say about his future, and could Howie be looking at a trade? Plus the top bounce-back candidate for the Birds, and why is he crucial to a Super Bowl run? Meanwhile, one veteran free agent is linked to Philly. And although Nakobe Dean may be out of sight, out of mind, one NFL analyst says to not count him out. Also, why shouldn't you sleep on rookies Ainias Smith and Will Shipley and Kellen Moore's offense? Let's talk about it. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? So apparently OTAs may be over, or at least in the near future, that is, with Tom Pelissero reporting that the NFL Players Association is working to finalize a proposal that would eliminate all voluntary on-field work in the spring in favor of a longer training camp ramp-up, meaning players would report like in late June or early July instead of much later like they currently do. And just for the record, it's sounding like if this gets passed, it'll be as early as next season that it gets implemented. I mean, I get it from several players' perspectives because it gives a longer duration for an offseason without having to report. However, the natural concern is how many more guys are likely to show up out of shape with a longer break. Because while several guys aren't even worries, there's always a few that it's kind of nice to get your eyes on so that you can remind them to come back to camp in the best shape of their lives. Now, I'd agree with you that yes, they're making millions of dollars, so why should they even have to be held accountable? Yet just being real, and we've all seen it way too many times, but sometimes they have to have something to keep them motivated. Also, one other element to consider in this argument is that with Roger Goodell continually pushing to make seasons longer, I can understand players fighting for as much time off as possible. Although looking at both sides, which way are you leaning towards what makes the most sense? And while we're on the topic of training camp, the Eagles officially confirmed the speculation that they'll be holding a joint practice with the New England Patriots on August 13th ahead of their second preseason game with the Pats on the 15th. And honestly, as fun as it is to get glimpses of guys during OTAs and try to speculate how someone might perform in 7-on-7s without pads on, the joint practices are extremely valuable and possibly even more so than the preseason matchups since most of the starters are typically held out. Which, as I mentioned starters being held out, the Birds returned to practice today. However, James Bradberry was rumored to not be in attendance, or who knows, maybe he just wasn't even allowed in the building. Okay, reminder, these practices are still voluntary. Yet at the same time, the more of these JB misses, you have to wonder if the writing's on the wall about Philly just moving on from the former All-Pro corner. Because I'm sorry, but Bradberry has basically been Burntberry ever since the Super Bowl. And I don't know, I've had several people ask me in the comments and live streams what happened to JB, and the only thing I've got for you is it seems like a confidence issue. Like, hear me out. I know the 30-year-old is typically quieter and not showing much emotion, but he's been a shell of himself since the holding call against the Chiefs. To be fair, yes, hardly anyone showed much of anything with Sean Desai as the defensive coordinator, or heck, even the switch to Matt Patricia was probably worse. But after drafting 2 corners and signing Isaiah Rodgers along with a couple more additions, I think you've already made your decision. So if anything, it's probably smart to keep him out of OTAs, assuming Howie Roseman is at least checking around to see if any team might be interested in a trade, which you'd have to imagine he is because Howie never stops working. And it's why NFL analyst Judy Batista has the Eagles getting back to the Super Bowl in a rematch with the Chiefs again. Unfortunately, while I agree with Judy on that first part, I disagree in her belief that the Chiefs three-peat. Because I'm sorry, but Philly's going to bounce back this time and get the job done. As PFF says the same thing for Birds' bounce-back candidate this year in CJ Gardner Johnson, despite the safety having a rough year last year and one of the worst gradings in recent memory. Since, he did tear his pec and play only 291 snaps last season. Now sure, Detroit fans were kind of ready to move on from him, especially after his conference championship performance. But we all know this because we've actually had Chauncey play really well, but whenever he's at the top of his game, the defense is just different, which is why I expect him to play very good in Vic Fangio's defense. Although talking about another player, how are you feeling about Josh Sweat, with the 27-year-old being a guy John McMullen calls one that has to produce? Also, I don't know why he changed his number from 94 to 19, maybe a reset of sorts, but it's kind of strange. And honestly, whether or not you like the change, I think we'd all agree that who cares as long as he actually produces. For real, if this dude gets back to his 2022 form, then this defense is going to be dangerous. Like, come on, Sweat's improved his sack totals every season for 4 straight years and was on pace to do that last year until going the final 8 games without a single sack. Now, obviously, Sweaty J's got something to prove after agreeing to a restructured contract, but hopefully he and Bryce Huff can prove to be a good tandem and make life difficult on opposing QBs. And look, ultimately, Sweat did generate a lot of pressure last season. It was just that the pass rush was so dysfunctional and disjointed and everything else. However, knowing what we do about Fangio, I highly doubt that part will be a problem anymore. Honestly, the key will be if he can put Sweat in the right spot to maximize his ability and help him to better understand how to drop in coverage. Even though, yes, I'm with you that I don't really love that facet in general. But at the same time, just trying to be realistic since we know Fangio's going to do that with pass rushers anyway. Also, let's just say that Sweat better show up in really good shape because as we've heard and we know from multiple press conferences that Fangio doesn't necessarily like to have a deep rotation on the D-line. So even though the argument could be made about Sweat's drop-off to end the season being the fact that he played a drastic number of snaps compared to other seasons, he's probably not going to get much of a reprieve under Fangio. Although having said that, how many sacks do you think Josh Sweat ends up with this season? Personally, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'd say somewhere within the 8 to 10 range, which is similar to the belief that I have in Devin White, not the sacks, but obviously just the optimism. Despite some outlets calling White the most overrated linebacker in the NFL. Like, where the heck do we get these labels? I mean, I understand he hasn't performed up to the standards the last couple of seasons, but given the 1-year, $7.5 million contract and only 3.5 of that guaranteed, he certainly doesn't feel like overrated. I don't know, maybe I'm too high on him, but I really feel like White will for sure be a lock as a starter, and then it really just comes down to either Nakobe Dean or Zack Baun as the other linebacker. And say what you will about Nakobe, however, Andrew Dejean made a point to make sure and not count him out, suggesting that there's actually an outside possibility when looking at what Fangio prefers from his linebackers that Dean could be a better fit as a weak side linebacker, citing Nakobe's slider build and cerebral, instinctive nature. But again, Dejean called it an outside chance, and I'm not necessarily sure that I want Nakobe lined up as a will. Of course, I'm all for competition and figuring out whatever the best position is. Plus, even though Zack Baun's getting the first team reps with Nakobe still recovering from the Lisfranc injury, I think we all realize it's super early, which is why the former third-round pick is still very optimistic about his chances.
The mental side is always hard, but we talk about having the dog mentality all the time, and I feel like it starts with being mentally strong, and I'm optimistic realist. So I'm always real about my situations, but I'm always optimistic. So the only thing I got to do is continue to just work, and everything else take care of itself. I know I've been out of sight, out of mind because of the injury, so I'm here now.
I can appreciate the attitude, and like I said, competition just makes the guys better. Also, the whole idea of Dean being injury-prone is probably a little bit overblown. Granted, yes, he missed a lot of games last season with a foot injury. However, Nakobe technically never missed any games at Georgia, and he didn't miss a single game or practice as a rookie. Alright, sure, obviously he didn't play much, losing the starting job to TJ Edwards, but the hope would be last season was kind of a fluke and he's able to finally show something this year. Anyway, curious to get y'all's thoughts on Nakobe because I have seen a lot of the comments and the injury prone and all that other stuff, but I could kind of see it both ways. Of course, don't sleep on Ainias Smith, if you even were. Like, I'm pretty sure most of you weren't. However, Bleeding Green Nation's Johnny Page said the 5th-round pick might be falling under the radar after taking a closer look at him. Y'all already know not really as much for me because I believe this dude should get a legit shot for wide receiver 3. Now, I get it that Calais Campbell is a veteran and has experience, but he's not the crazy weapon that Sub-Zero is. Yes, another reminder that Ainias used to play running back. Also, shout out to Rube Frank, but Calais Campbell is one of only 4 wide receivers in NFL history drafted in the first 2 rounds with at least 100 career targets to average below 25 yards per game and below 10 yards per catch. The others are David Palmer, Dexter McCluster, and Tavon Austin. Again, I'll say it, maybe he wasn't being used properly and it's tough to do anything successful in New York. However, Ainias Smith is just a guy who constantly fights for extra yards and has that never-say-die mentality. So add all that on top of Smith's dynamic big play ability, his elusiveness, and being underrated as a route runner, and I just can't see how the Eagles aren't going to get him on the field.
We're all really excited about him. It's great when you kind of watch a guy for, obviously when I'm starting to watch a guy, Howie's watched him probably 3 or 4 times by the time I get to watch him one time, but it's always fun to go into his office and be like, hey, I love this guy. And I think that was definitely a guy that we did that with. His ability to run after the catch, his ability to get in and out of breaks. I think he's extremely tough. I love that about him. That's really what sticks out. He catches the ball really well. And so those are the things that that really stick out, and it's going to be fun to see how we can get him the football and different ways that he can contribute. Both on special teams and on offense.
Exactly, which the more you watch him, it's fair to say he's got that dog in him. Oh yeah, and remember that lackluster effort from Quez? Well, that doesn't happen with Ainias. Heck, just look at his willingness to block and give maximum effort. Honestly, the only main drawback is his size and maybe the potential limitedness about playing on the outside. But either way, let's just say Ainias was made for Philly, like his behind-the-scenes content with vlogs and everything is exactly what we need, especially since we barely get glimpses of the squad most of the time. Which is why I asked him about coming on the show, so we'll see if he can make time. But y'all go ahead and subscribe to his channel. I've got a link in the description and, I don't know, maybe encourage him to hop on. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but Ainias is a great potential addition to the return game with special teams coordinator Michael Calais citing his explosiveness and describing him as flashy. Personally, I'm just going to be glad to see him once he's back and healthy and on the field. And I'm also looking forward to seeing Will Shipley's versatility and Kellen Moore's offense. Yes, for the record, I didn't just love this pick whenever it happened. However, I'm starting to come around.
It takes a big man to admit his mistake, and I am that big man.
Okay, look, especially when RB2 is up for grabs, or at least there's the possibility of that, you can't help but see the intrigue Kellen Moore had for Shipley in his offense. Because not only is he an elusive runner who possesses power, but he can also be a difference maker in the passing game. And sure, anyone could do pretty good in Jeff Stoutland's run game. But Shipley's familiarity with zone runs and setting up defenders is really fun to watch. Oh yeah, and maybe my favorite description of him from multiple reporters is that he just seems to play like he has a chip on his shoulder. And just like Ainias isn't below doing the dirty work and putting the team first. Now, I agree with Johnny Page that his fumbles have been costly. Heck, he had 4 just last season. Because if we know one thing, ball security is job security. But I mean, it's not like he can't clean that up, plus getting to play behind Saquon is literally the perfect situation, which is what former NFL Pro Bowl running back and Clemson's current running back coach CJ Spiller called it. Telling NBC's Ashlyn Sullivan that was my hope for him, to go to an organization that has a veteran guy that can really just take you up under his wing and show you what it means to be a pro. And for real, I mean, who better than Saquon Barkley?
I see him hurdling over guys and making big plays at Clemson. So I'm excited to have him on his team. I feel like he can help us out. And for me, him picking my brain, we're both kind of learning at the same time right now because, like I said, I'm in a new playbook and a new system. But to try to be the best teammate I can for him and looking at the running back room, this is the first year, I don't think last year I was. I think it's the first year I'm the oldest guy in the room. So that's definitely funny to me, and I think it's a beauty in it too. You see how fast your time goes in here, and when you're having fun with it, the time flies by.
By the way, much like Ainias, CJ Spiller believes that Will Shipley is the ideal candidate for kick returns, especially with the new rule change, which I'm definitely down for that. But how about y'all? I mean, I think it's fair to say that these rookies this year are going to make a more significant impact than last season's rookies did. Now, while there's for sure a lot riding on the success of the current squad on the roster, the Birds were recently linked by ESPN to a potential signing to the D-line in 38-year-old Calais Campbell. After the 6'8", 282-pound edge tied for the team lead in sacks with 6.5 in Atlanta last year. So yeah, he can obviously still play and produce. Plus, it makes a lot of sense, especially to add a guy who can play as an end in Fangio's 3-4 front while being able to hold up against the ground game. I mean, sure, Campbell seems like a logical potential signing, and obviously there's lots of guys being linked. However, like we were talking about the training camp and the potentials of the changes there, it feels like Campbell's one of those players who doesn't necessarily need to show up to camp, and so I doubt that he would really sign for something really soon. Which is why, realistically, if the Eagles did get him, this one feels like much more of an in-season acquisition, similar to an Ndamukong Suh of the past. That way he's fresh and providing mid-season reinforcements and doesn't necessarily have to go through the rigors of a full NFL offseason. But with that being said, still certainly a guy to keep your eye on, yet it'd be surprising to see him move really quickly here. All right, let me know what you guys think about all this. Also, reminder, hit that like button and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already because we have the AJ Brown jersey giveaway where if you want to check it out, you just go over to the video right there and type in AJ in the comments. Also, we're going to have some ticket giveaways coming soon, so stay tuned. But I'll catch you on the next one. This has been the Philly Special.